Hi. As a healer and as a human, we must use our limited mental resources for responding to everything that happens on our screens in any given moment. First, we execute our rotation, constantly deciding which buttons to press and in which order. Second, we respond to various dungeon mechanics by healing incoming damage or by moving out of dangerous areas. Third, we use our mental capacities for broader level decision making, for example by mentally preparing for the next section of a dungeon or the next damage event in a specific fight. Especially for new healers, rotation and mechanics take up most of our mental load, and we have little mental resources left for making smart decisions about our gameplay. This leads to a reactive and ultimately inferior playstyle. Therefore, the key to improving as a healer is to move mental resources out of rotation and mechanics and into making smarter decisions. In this video, we'll discuss how to do that and how the freed up mental resources can be used for decision making. Let's start with the rotation. In contrast to games like StarCraft, where playing faster usually means playing better, World of Warcraft is a bit more similar to a turn-based game, with each of our global cooldowns constituting one mini turn. And during this turn, we must make one decision about which ability to press next. When we reach the point at which we can do that correctly, we have solved the rotation puzzle and can focus our cognition on mechanics and decision making. So, how do we facilitate a smooth rotation at a low mental load? First, when creating a new character, we leverage existing mental connections and muscle memory by using the same keybinds for similar abilities on other characters. For example, I use X and Shift X as the main defensive buttons on all of my healers. Second, we work toward understanding our rotation at an intellectual level. We do that by watching in-depth class guides, which do not only explain which buttons to press, but more importantly, why we press them. Usually this process will highlight a bunch of spell and talent interactions that are important for your class. Track all of these interactions on your screen using prominently visible WeakAuras. The goal of this tracking is to constantly remind you that this talent interaction exists and that you should suit your gameplay around it. Creating a WeakAura like this is very easy. Simply open the WeakAuras menu, click on New Aura, select Pre-made Auras, Icon, Default, and then select the buff that you want to track. You can choose various ways of displaying it, all of which are fine. Make these WeakAuras big and in your face. They aren't there to look good. They're there to ensure that you don't forget constantly considering optimal spell sequences and talent interactions. At some point, the existence of these relationships will be familiar to you and you will integrate them in your play naturally. You can then begin removing the visual clutter from the WeakAuras on your screen. Third, I would strongly advise getting into Mouseover Healing, if you're not already doing that. What it does is that you can move your mouse cursor over a player's unit frame and then press your healing spell to heal them without actually needing to target them. Over the course of a dungeon, this reduces the total number of actions you need to perform by thousands of clicks, as each action takes a small amount of time and also carries with it a small potential for making a mistake. Enabling Mouseover Healing makes your gameplay less error-prone. You can enable it in the interface options. Simply type Mouseover into the search bar. Mouseover Healing is especially important when you want to optimize damage as a healer, as you will never really need to target a teammate and you can just leave your target on the enemy you want to damage, pressing your damaging abilities when there's nothing to heal without needing to make targeting decisions. However, if you really don't like Mouseover Healing, I'd suggest at least creating a macro for your main damaging abilities to reduce the need for constantly switching between targeting allies and targeting enemies. Use a macro that looks like this to attack the target of your target. This way, you can attack enemies without needing to target them. Lastly, Mouseover Healing or not, I'd strongly recommend getting a WeakAura or add-on to make your mouse cursor more visible. It is super distracting to lose track of your mouse cursor in the middle of a stressful fight. I use a WeakAura called Ultimate Mouse Cursor. You can find this WeakAura and all other add-ons and WeakAuras I'm talking about in this video in the video description. Fourth, review your gameplay using logs. To do that, install the Warcraft logs uploader and track your gameplay by typing /combat log in the chat. At the end of the dungeon, you can then upload the log to the Warcraft logs website. Navigate to the healing tab and click on your own character. You will see a breakdown of which spells contributed how much to your overall healing profile. Now, go find some logs of top players from the same dungeon, ideally on the same key level. Compare your own healing profile to theirs. Are there any major differences in healing contributions of different spells? Use this information to ask questions about your own gameplay. Do I use Powered Shield often enough? Is my atonement healing in a good place? Apply these questions to guide your behavior in the next key and see if your healing profile more strongly aligns with that of top players. Fifth, sit down to drink every time that you can, even if your mana is still quite high. Just assign a hotkey for it and hammer the hotkey when you briefly leave combat between pulls. What this often achieves is that you don't need to worry about mana at all, letting you focus fully on your optimal rotation. So, drink as often as possible as it costs you absolutely nothing, and adopting this habit is strictly superior to not doing so. Finally, and there's no way around it, mastering your rotation takes practice. So focus on repetitions, play a lot, and adopt a learner's mindset while doing so. Actively think about what you did right and wrong at the end of each key. Build muscle memories for irrelevant spell sequences, and you will find that executing your rotation becomes second nature, letting you focus more strongly on dungeon mechanics rather than being occupied with figuring out which buttons to press next. Now, having worked on our rotation, we now move on to considering how we can reduce the mental toll of dungeon mechanics. First, when it comes to mechanics, knowledge is power. Our goal is to transition from a reactive playstyle to a proactive one. So instead of being surprised by incoming damage from a boss ability, we want to know about the ability in advance, anticipate its arrival, and then respond appropriately. Build these skills by reading or watching guides in which the healing challenges of all dungeons are laid out in detail. Second, set up a tracking solution for all important dungeon mechanics so that you can see them coming before they occur. I recommend using the add-ons Bigwigs and Littlewigs for tracking. If you want to get the exact solution you can see on my screen, additionally install the WeakAura Raid Ability Timeline, which takes the input from Bigwigs and transforms it into a vertical display bar. I also recommend getting Bigwigs Voice, which is a plugin that plays a voice line telling you which ability is coming up, instead of just playing a nondescript air horn or beep or boop. This makes it much easier for us to know which ability is headed our way next. However, receiving a ton of voice messages can also be distracting, and I would recommend enabling voice only for the most important abilities. If you want to set up a tailored solution, type /BW in the chat to open the Bigwigs options. Click on the Dungeon Bosses tab and then click on the individual abilities of different bosses to enable or disable the voice queue. You can do the same for the trash in each dungeon. The process will take you about 10 minutes, but I promise it will be worth it. Third, I strongly recommend the WeakAura Targeted Spells, which shows you who is being targeted by an incoming mechanic. For example, in the first room of the rookery you will be able to see at whom the lightning bolts are aimed, which lets you prepare for incoming damage before it occurs. Pay attention to the indicators that show you who is about to take damage, and you will acquire one of the most important skills as a healer, allowing you to protect your target even before the damage comes in. Doing that correctly helps you stay ahead of the dungeon rather than falling behind. Finally, organize your UI in such a way that all important information is displayed in the same place, so that your eye movements are minimized. I like to cluster the important information around the party frames, because this is what I'm looking at most of the time as a healer anyway. This is especially important for me personally because at some point in the past I decided that playing on a 49-inch TV would be a good way to go, but to be honest I kinda regret that decision. I also miss my second monitor and will probably go back to a 2-monitor setup soon. Okay, So now we have freed up some mental resources by optimizing our rotation, learning about dungeon mechanics, setting up functional interface options for tracking, and putting in the appropriate number of repetitions to ingrain these processes in our minds. This makes us a good healer. To become a great healer, we need to make great tactical and strategic decisions. First, we look at micro decisions. As healers, our rotations cannot be fully automated in a way that a DPS rotation can, because decision making about whom to heal and at what time and with which spell is constantly required. As a first step toward making great decisions as a healer, I recommend developing a set of repeatable decision heuristics. What this means is identifying damage patterns that occur frequently in dungeons and having a mentally prepared solution for these patterns ready. For example, in this season there are many scenarios in which bosses target 2 players with a high damage spell, leaving behind a ticking damage over time effect. How do you deal with these events? Do you have a plan? If not, make one now and try to execute it reliably when the event happens next. Examples for such a heuristic could be: I will always use Power Word Shield on one player and cast Penance at the other. Or, I will always put my Earth Shield on one player and cast Healing Surge at the other. Or, if someone is low or I'm feeling otherwise unprepared, I will always use Pain Suppression on one of the players to make sure that no one dies. You can do the same for big AoE events, for example. So you could formulate decision heuristics like: on the first AoE damage event in a big pull, I will always use my Evangelism as my first healing cooldown. You can also formulate heuristics to remind you of using your utility. For example, on each trash pull, I will immediately use Oppressive Roar if it's available. Or, if it's available, I will always use Capacitor Totem in a trash pull. These heuristics make sure that you have a good solution prepared for most scenarios and you don't need to rely on active decision making in the moment, which is more prone to mistakes. Of course, using heuristics like these slightly reduces your flexibility and might not be the perfect solution for all scenarios. But again, you can begin relaxing the heuristic nature of these strategies as your expertise grows and your real-time decision making improves. As a next step for making good in-fight decisions, use a cooldown tracking add-on such as Omni CD to see which defensives your teammates have available and if they are currently using one. Here, freed up mental resources can really help you to look at their cooldowns briefly when deciding whom to focus with your big heals and who needs less attention because they already have a defensive rolling. Finally, let's look at our macro decisions, which are the broader level strategic choices we are making. As a healer, this mostly comes down to planning out our cooldowns both in terms of mapping them across specific fights, as well as across entire dungeons. For individual fights, our planning starts with knowledge about the length of the encounter. It depends quite a bit on the key level, of course, but let's say the average fight takes about 3 minutes. With this encounter length, we are theoretically able to use our shorter duration cooldowns multiple times. For example, a 1.5 minute cooldown fits into the fight window twice if we use it early enough. However, our longer duration cooldowns cannot be used more than once, regardless of when we use them. Our goal with planning each encounter is to maximize the total number of cooldowns we can put into the fight. This means using our shorter duration cooldowns early, making them rotate back at the end of the fight. Conversely, we use our longer duration cooldowns in the middle of the fight, while we are waiting for our short cooldowns to rotate back up. Use this strategy diligently and make it second nature to briefly consider your cooldowns at the start of each boss fight, clearly planning which cooldown to use first and then following up on the rest of the plan. On a broader level, we should also make a plan for mapping out our cooldowns across the entire dungeon. Healing requirements in dungeons almost always move in waves, with some sections needing massive healing and others being relatively easy. The key when making strategic decisions about your cooldown usage is to plan out our cooldowns in such a way that our power spikes when the healing requirement is highest. Let's take Workshop as an example. The healing requirement distribution in the dungeon looks something like this. At first, many pugs pull really big, gathering up all the Strider Tongs and the bombs. The healing requirements here are average. Not low, but not very high either. However, as the arena boss afterwards is extremely easy, but also takes a relatively long time, it is absolutely no problem to go bananas on blowing through all of your healing cooldowns on this first pull. Just use everything you have, as you will not need it later. Then, during the boss fight, you can let all your cooldowns recuperate for the pulls after that, where the combination of metal gunks and waste processing units can pose a big problem, especially when your group does not adequately control them. The dogs before Cujo can also be sometimes a bit problematic, so ideally you want to use all of your cooldowns spaced out during this passage. Then you can enter the Cujo fight again without any of your cooldowns remaining, as the boss is really easy and does not require any of them. The same is true for the next section, and your goal here should be to finish the third boss with everything available to be ready for the spider tanks. The rest of the dungeon has moderate healing requirements throughout, and you should space out your cooldowns evenly. For effective strategic planning, think about all dungeons in this manner, and you'll find yourself saving up cooldowns for the big challenges, while also being very free in using them when you know that the next fight is an easy one. As a final remark, I want to touch very briefly on the mental approach to improving. In my opinion, nothing kills progress more than always looking for the fault in others. If someone makes a mistake, instead of berating them, ask yourself if there is something you could have done to save the situation despite the mistake. Be humble in your victories and reflective in your failures. If you found this video useful, please like and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, everybody, and see ya.